Data incidents, data breaches, cyber incidents make the news all over the world, and it's something which we are more or less used to. However, most of the businesses do hope that this somehow will not touch them and they will pass through. They will not be harmed, or they will not be impacted by the data leaks. So indeed, this assumption is wrong, unfortunately, because it will happen. The question is not if, the question is when. And the only real question is, are you ready for that? That's why we have successfully pitched the greatest experts in the fields from legal, IT, and PR. And today we exactly discuss on how to behave when you are at war, how to behave when you are in the crisis, and how to behave when you are on the field. So today's speakers will more concentrate on the management of the data incident, on the management of the big event, on the management of the big bang when it happens. That's why we have invited highly trained, highly skilled experts who basically are highly trained at war, at crisis, and not just for preparation, but in action. Today we'll touch the Big Bang event, and we'll try to concentrate on 3 items: on the legal management, on the IT management, and the marketing and media management of the data incident. And the Big Bang and the first seconds, first minutes, first hours, first weeks, and first half a year are critical. However, we'll see how in the time scale this unfolds and how differently this should be managed in the first day, in the first month, and in the first half a year, because different teams, different people should handle these from the time scale perspective. My honor is to present Mari-Liis, Arina from the legal side, Aleksei from tech and IT side, and Arijus from media crisis management side. And hi to everyone again. And these, as I've said, are the best experts who are highly trained on war zone. That's why we'll have the agenda sketched in the following way. We'll have 3 presentations of 20 minutes each, which will make us around 60 minutes. Then we'll have Q&A session at the end, which is 15-20 minutes, which will be moderated by myself. So basically, you are free to handle the questions you want and to pass those through to us so that we can put them on the Q&A session afterwards. And now, my honor to present the floor to Mari-Liis, who will start presentation of the legal side of the data incident management. So Mari-Liis, the floor is yours.
Hello from my side as well, and from Estonia. As Mindaugas said, my name is Mari-Liis, and I'm dealing with data protection, IT issues in TGS Baltic in Estonia. So I'm just gonna before giving the floor to Arina and also Mindaugas to cover the legal part. Then I'm just gonna give a brief overview. Or an intro of what incidents we are going to be talking about, and why are we going to be talking about those incidents. So I hope you can see the slides. And firstly, to start with, there are 2 terms that we are talking about. One, when we are talking about security incidents or breaches. Next slide, please. So a security incident is a harmful event or offense that results in a threat to the integrity, availability, or confidentiality of the information technology. Whereas a personal data breach, which is something that people who are dealing with GDPR are definitely well familiar with, is when a breach happens that also impacts or has something to do with personal data. So where a security incident happens, then we know that something bad is happening, but that bad thing may not always be happening to personal data. So it's more of a general term. And Arina will speak about like the differences and why it's important in a few minutes in more detail as well. But just to give a very general understanding and overview, then the reason why we have to differentiate between the 2 terms is because of regulatory differences as well, which is something that is not very often in practice actually thought about. Namely, as said, a personal data breach is when a breach touches upon personal data, and that's when we have to go and see what the GDPR says. That's when the GDPR applies, and all the notification obligations, etc., deriving from them. So basically, when there's an incident, but we find out that it does not involve personal data, then we don't have to go to the GDPR, and we don't have to deal with the issues there. And on the other hand, there are actually other regulations that also touch upon security incidents and their notification, etc. For example, under the NIS directive, operators of essential services in a wide range of critical sectors, for example, energy, transport, finance, also have notification obligations of security incidents. And the same applies for telecoms, trust service providers, and there could be others under specific regulations. So it's quite important to understand the difference, because only then you will know what regulations you actually are subject to and know to react appropriately. So today I think we're going to take a more wider approach and speak about not only personal data breaches, but security incidents in general. So if we move on to the next slide, then why are we talking about those topics, and what exactly are we talking about? So what are the threats that bring about the topicality of this? So according to the ENISA, which is the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity report of threat landscape in 2021, they have identified those 9, if I'm not mistaken, topics to be the key threats, at least in 2021, which are cryptojacking, threats against data, malware, disinformation, misinformation, non-malicious threats, threats against availability and integrity, ransomware, obviously, email-related threats, and supply chain threats. We won't have that much time to go into too much detail with all of those threats, but I would maybe just like to mention some that are maybe not as obvious what exactly they are and why are they listed by ENISA. So firstly, cryptojacking or hidden crypto mining, which is a type of cybercrime where a criminal secretly uses your computing power to generate cryptocurrency. So something that's going on, but maybe not as obvious to everyone as ransomware and email related threats when it comes to the cybersphere. And another one, which is quite interesting to me at least, that's the first time it's been mentioned in the ENISA report, is disinformation and misinformation, which has to do with such dis and misinformation campaigns in social media and social media platforms. And why it's included in this quite short list of threats by ENISA is because apparently it's quite frequently used in hybrid attacks to reduce the overall perception of trust, which they do consider a major proponent of cybersecurity. And as for non-malicious threats, then just to explain that includes threats which are obviously, yes, not malicious in their intent. So, for example, human errors, system misconfigurations, etc. So things that may happen, but they happen not because someone is targeting you, but just because sometimes things in life happen. And on the next slide, I have brought out a few top trends that ENISA also mentioned. One of them being maybe not very surprisingly that ransomware was the prime threat for 2020 and 2021. Also maybe interestingly that COVID-19 was the dominant lure in campaigns for email attacks, and also probably that's why there was a surge in healthcare sector related data breaches, just because this is the world we're living in at this moment. And COVID-19 also had to do with a spike in non-malicious incidents because apparently that became a multiplier for human errors and system misconfigurations. So the threat landscape is quite wide. I'm sure Aleksei will speak about some of the things in more detail as well, or at least we can ask him about them during the Q&A session. But this is the landscape that we're living in, that we're dealing with from the legal, IT, and PR side. Just to be on the same page to begin with. And with that, I would give the floor to my colleague from Latvia, Arina, who will speak a bit more detail from the legal perspective.
Hello from Riga. My name is Arina Stivriņa, and I am dealing with data protection and technology matters at TGS in Latvia. And today I will try to highlight a few important legal requirements from the GDPR perspective, mostly. So next slide, please. First, let's take a brief look at the breach management process. Last Friday, we had a webinar on data breaches in Latvian, and for those who have been there, this is essentially the same process, a bit expanded. I will cover mostly the step number 4, and my colleague Mindaugas will talk about other steps in details. However, before I take you to step number 4, I would like to emphasize the importance of a holistic data breach management system, where you have all those steps which are shown on this slide covered. Work with data breaches more often than not will be a work in crisis mode. Obviously, you cannot change that, but you can and should make a plan to avoid unnecessary consequences of the breach. And by unnecessary consequences, I mean not only unneeded mistakes, but also a psychological toll the breach may have on your team. Now let's get to the steps required under the GDPR. Next slide, please. The first step is detection. Often breaches get discovered only after the attacker had access to your system for quite some time. Last year, in a ransomware breach in Latvia, exfiltration or data transfer was done gradually over a few weeks, and a breach was detected only when the data was already encrypted and the company received a ransom note. So you'll do much better if you make sure to have a proper monitoring in place and your employees are trained to recognize a data breach. Our guest speaker, cybersecurity expert Aleksei Gornõi, will cover containment in details. Next step from the GDPR perspective is initial evaluation. It is important to remember that you don't have to collect all the evidence and make detailed assessment. However, your initial assessment has to identify whether you are dealing with a data breach or a security incident, as my colleague Mari-Liis has explained in detail before. By doing this preliminary risk assessment, you actually can arrive at the conclusion whether you have to notify the data breach to the supervisory authority or maybe not, because not all the data breaches should be notifiable to the supervisory authority. Some of them, as you may conclude in your preliminary risk assessment, are not likely to cause risk to data subjects. Can we go to the next block? So yes, when you have arrived to the conclusion whether you have to notify the DPA, you can finally do all. Sorry a bit. So when you have arrived to the conclusion whether you have to notify the DPA, after that, you can do the detailed evaluation and collect all the evidence and later on submit additional report if you need to. Next slide, please. So a few words about this preliminary evaluation and risk assessment. You need to make sure to obviously find out all the factors which are mentioned on this slide. It is also important to keep in mind that the supervisory authority may require to submit your initial assessment after receiving your notification. especially if under the circumstances, it is arguable whether you had to notify data subjects if you already didn't do it. Next slide, please. And finally, a few words about reporting. Question whether to report is $1 million question. And we had an entire webinar on it in Latvia last week, by the way. It is quite understandable that some companies may want to keep the breach confidential. After all, the GDPR requires a company to incriminate itself. Reporting on itself and the GDPR fines also don't promote the transparency about the data breaches. And neither do the possible liabilities of the management board. However, one should keep in mind that not only the GDPR sets out the obligation to report, it also provides a fine for not reporting. And by the way, for not reporting on time. So by not reporting, you risk getting much heavier fine. In some cases, where the potential risk to data subjects is likely to be high, you also have to inform data subjects. You will have to decide on channels, how you will report. In some cases, you may even use media as a channel. Also, keep in mind that this is a moment when it is likely the public and the media will find out. And our PR expert, Arijus, will cover this aspect in details later in our webinar. The next question is when you should report. The GDPR sets a deadline as 72 hours from the moment the controller has become aware of the breach. The trick here is that having become aware is somewhat fluid term, and National Supervisory Authority may interpret it differently. But generally, that will be a point of time where the controller has reasonably established that the data breach happened. In some cases, this point in time will be quite obvious. For example, if your data is unavailable and you receive a ransom note. However, in others, it may take some time to reasonably establish that you're dealing with a data breach. But remember that the supervisory authority may require you to prove your statements. Just recently, on 31st March in 2021, the Dutch supervisory authority fined hotel search platform Booking.com 475,000 for the late notification. And in this case, they have received initial news on the phishing on 9th January and have notified on 7th February, more than a month later. So the Dutch supervisory authority had concluded that Booking.com failed to launch a timely investigation by not acting on initial reports on phishing it has received about an incident, and considered that Booking.com has to be aware already on 13th of January. Also, one should keep in mind that in national cybersecurity laws, which are implementing NIS directive, they may require not only state institutions, but also private companies in some sector, such as energy, telecommunication, to report in much shorter time frames, such as 24 hours and 4 hours, and even immediately. So the next question is how to report. Well, usually each supervisory authority has established its own reporting system, and we recommend to use it. However, at least in Latvia, you can prepare the report as an application in free form. And I believe in other Baltic states it is so as well. And my colleague Mindaugas may comment on it later. Finally, you should keep in mind that in case of multinational companies, the reporting generally has to be done to the supervisory authority in a member state where the controller has its main establishment. However, from the practical side, last week in Latvian webinar, we had Latvian supervisory authority as a speaker, and the question was asked from the audience whether there are any consequences as to reporting to the wrong supervisory authority. For example, if you mistake the lead supervisory authority and submit the notification in another state. And the answer was that generally it should not lead to any negative consequences. And so with that, I will give the floor to my colleague Mindaugas.
We can proceed with the next slide then. And thanks, Mari-Liis and Arina. Your presentation was very good as far as the legal requirements and the legal framework is concerned. Now I will jump in to the company level, to the organizational level, and let's try to look at what happens as of the event, what happens as of the big bang in the company, and how this should be tackled from different sizes and from different stakeholders' view. So to start with, it's indeed interesting to find out that in most of the cases, at least from my practice, one may say that businesses usually overlook and oversee major consequences of the data breach, and in most of the cases, they try to de-escalate that as far as possible. And you may hear from time to time that, look, at worst, we will pay the fine, and basically we will get away from this by paying some kind of sanction, which is amount of money. But really, this is not correct attitude, because financial or non-money financial loss, it's not the only loss. We need to understand that it's also about reputation. Not in all cases, of course, but in many cases which are escalated, it's also about business reputation. Then director civil liability and liability is also at stake, because I mean directors are responsible for cybersecurity requirements as such, and both the shareholders and the creditors can claim in certain, of course, circumstances the directors, and this aspect is very often overlooked. Investigation, not only by data protection authorities, but investigations by other authorities are also very likely, especially if the business is regulated, right? If it's financial institution or if it's an insurance company. Class actions and individual actions, again, this aspect is very often overlooked, and even if theoretically more or less it is in the minds, but somehow it's also looked as if it's a very far-fetched thing. But please believe me, this is not a very far-fetched forecast. Agreements and claims by the counterparts and creditors, investors, all these stakeholders raise the question, and unfortunately, businesses are usually not prepared well enough for these consequences to face them. Next slide, please. Again, so in order to understand what impact any data incident may have on the company, it's important to understand what kind of stakeholders may be impacted. And again, here, these stakeholders are often overlooked. And in most of the cases, business looks like this. Okay, we are and our clients are, and basically DPA or regulatory authority at best. However, there are other stakeholders which, in my view, are even more important, which is the employees of the company, AI staff of the company, which is very often overlooked. And investors and creditors, others who may start raising questions on the basis of the business agreements you have with them. So if we proceed with the next slide, we may also understand that it's not only the consequences which are overlooked, it's not only the stakeholders which are overlooked, it's the time scale which is also overlooked. And as Arina has put it very clearly, that event itself, the Big Bang event, is normally already way after the real attack has happened. I mean, when it comes to the knowledge of the company, it's already afterwards. In most of the cases, the event starts earlier than it actually strikes the company. And in order to understand the whole data incident management, one needs to look at the time scale, which is as follows. First of all, what has happened before the moment the company has understood that it isn't a problem. And most probably the roots of the problem are way before the event, which may be several years ago. Then after the event, which we will talk right now a bit more, the immediate response and the midterm response and long-term response are three totally different things. And you can't spoil that up. You can't mess this up. The response, which is immediate and which is 48 hours response from the legal side, is a bit different from what you need to do in 2 or 3 weeks. And it's a bit more different from what you need to do in the long-term perspective. And therefore, you need to understand that, right, immediate response, as Arina has said, it has a lot to do with the preliminary assessment, with the responding and reporting requirements which are in place. However, you need to understand that the actual investigation and the actual outcomes of your internal investigation might pop up only 1 month or even later on. So all the facts will come into the puzzle only after some time. And therefore, you are always in the balance of how much we need to disclose upon the first notification to the clients and to the DPAs if we are only under the preliminary assessment. And again, I will come back to this a bit later on, but it's very important to understand that you are not required to report each and every detail as of the first 24 or 72 hours, because the internal investigation takes at least several weeks, sometimes even months. Then, when it comes to the long-term management, which is more or less 6 months, then you need to understand that you will still have data subject requests afterwards. You will still have the investigation, DPA investigation going on. And again, you need to be prepared for that, but it's totally a different task from the task, which is the immediate response task. And then, which is very often overlooked, is the claims and insurance things, which basically it's not only about individual and class claims, it's also about the creditors' claims. This may pop up in 3 years' time, because basically normally we have the 3 years prescription period, and in other way around, this event may basically be in your head, and this event may attack you even after 36 months from the date of the event. But for curiosity purposes, it's very interesting to understand that at average and on average, the containment and data incident management takes 280 days. It's on average a sector-based analysis, which was made in 2021 by IBM, and this figure has struck me, because if you look at the perspective, you need to understand that it's really long process. The next phase, please. But again, I think we need to start from the basics, and I won't spend much time on this slide, but this is the conceptual framework for the data breach and incident management. And everything lies within 3 layers, and everything lies within 3 words, which is prevention, detection, and response. Basically, this is the rationale of the GDPR. This is the rationale of the national, cybersecurity regulation. This is the rationale of the data incident management in each and every company. I mean, you can't have normal response unless you do have everything in place before. You can't have normal and good detection unless you have proper prevention and prophylactics in place. So these 3 things are holistic elements which are tied to each other, and you can't have normal and good response only by having good papers, but without learning or awareness and trainings and so on. So I will simply drop a few lines about this layer by layer attitude, which is as follows. The first layer is, and the first line of prevention, detection, and response is people. Everywhere, in each and every company, the first line of defense is people. That's why trainings, awareness, and basically attitude towards the stuff is the key element of any good incident management. Then the second line, of course, is the internal rules, self-assessment policies, and internal regulations which should be in place. Again, it's not only about pipers, it's about the process, constant self-assessment and risk assessment of the systems, of the security status, and data status. The third layer is your outside partners. You are not alone in the world. You're always connected to the vendors, you're always connected to the service providers, and no matter how bulletproof you are, if your vendors and service providers are weak. That's why vendors' due diligence, contracts with them is key. And if we talk about the response, then we'll see that vendor contracts are very important, to have good vendor contracts. And insurance, it comes above, it comes later on. It's important, it's critical, but it does not change the whole system of prevention, detection, and response. The next slide, please. But the first line of defense is people. And again, this slide shows that even despite the fact that you train them a lot, despite the fact that you raise awareness a lot, still more than 50% of the crisis, more than 50% of the data incidents happens because of the stupidity. Because of the stupidity and silliness of the people. I mean, on one hand, they are concerned about the data leak. However, on the other hand, they don't invest anything in protecting themselves. So this slide shows that this dichotomy, right? This dichotomy and attitude is everywhere. So therefore, even if we have ideal policies, even if we have ideal procedures, you need to assume that people still will behave in an irrational way. They will always be lazy. They will always be reluctant. They will always be stupid. This is the assumption which is best for any incident management. Next slide, please. Breach management starts with good prevention, and again, good policies, as I've said, right? This is the line number 2. Good policies and good procedures are not only because they are good papers. No, One of the key reasons we need to have them is the aim of these procedures is to help to overcome human errors, panic, and human biases. Why? Because there is no way you need to have time, and there is no way you can improvise or think during a war. When you are at crisis, you need to follow the instructions. When you are at war, you need to follow the items which are in the instruction. That's why it's critical to have this plan. Even if it's not ideal, it's better to have some items. Because otherwise, if you are not playing by playbook, then you have big problems, because the human nature acts like this. Delete the evidence as soon as you have them, hide the traces, conceal the scale and criticality. And you can more or less resonate with that, right? Because being the guy who is responsible for the IT and being the guy who is responsible for the incident, you can more or less be inclined to conceal the things, because at the end of the day, you are not feeling unsafe. You're not feeling, safe yourself, right? Acting in panic, negotiating with the ransomware attacker, spreading the panic in the organization and your team, and calling a friend for advice. This is very normal for the human being. But the policies which should be in place need exactly to overcome these. Next slide, please. Item number 3 from the management framework is contracts. Again, with the outside contract management system, you need to have in mind at least 2 clauses which need to be in every clause, in every sort of contract with vendor. It's assistance obligations from them and good reaction times and SLA. Again, this is often overlooked because, well, it's a theoretical thing. No, having good reaction times and having good assistance obligations in the contract helps. Not always, but helps a lot. And then the last but not the least is insurance. As I've said, insurance does not replace the security. It does provide comfort in cost amortization. However, what you need to have in mind is that no insurance will be valid if you are not compliant with GDPR. I mean, you can't insure against the sanction or against the penalty by not complying with the GDPR. I mean, you can pay off. You can't buy immunity from GDPR by paying premium for the insurance policy. No, it won't be valid unless you're compliant with GDPR. Next, please. Importance of the plan, as I've said, I won't go into that into much deeper, but the importance of having a plan is critical, just because of the reason that you don't have time to wait, you don't have time to think. Therefore, you need to have at least in advance prepared the team vision. Who will be the team? Who will be the incident commander in action? Who will be the incident commander in chief? And the immediate reaction during the 24 and 48 hours and 2-3 days is important. And therefore, if you have at least tested and simulated that, the reality and the actions at war and crisis are much simpler than improvising without a plan. Next slide. And the last but not the least, how you deal with the critical stakeholders. And the first stakeholder you must deal before anything else are your employees. And this is overlooked. This is always, not always, but in 90% of the cases, this is overlooked. So always deal with the stuff before anything else. Be open, frank, and consistent with them. Be empathic, which means that try to tell the story and don't use legalistic words. Don't involve lawyer in communication with employees. Tell your story first. Take responsibility. And I mean, don't say that you are not liable and don't blame others, because, well, indeed, the idea is to say, look, we will contain that if we act as a team. And of course, channels. Internal channels of communication with people via Slack or other accessible channels is very important, that they know what's happening on a daily basis, on hourly basis. Don't leave them in absence of information. Next slide, please. And only then clients. Yes, only then clients. Be open, frank, and consistent. Better say less than more. But and this is a trick. This is a trick because, as I've said in the very beginning, I mean, you don't have all the details, but you need to communicate upfront. You need to communicate with clients at the 0 hour, but you don't have all the details. That's why this is always a subtle game. Therefore, but again, the message is here, better say less, but be consistent, and more information will follow, more will follow. This is our preliminary review, but don't be don't be mistaken and don't mistake them. Be empathic, of course. And the best model in risk management, of course, Arijus will say that a bit more, is always be empathic, always keep this 4-step in each and every crisis communication. Understanding and sorrow, always. Then next steps and action plan that we are control, we are containing, we are detecting, we are investigating. Then, of course, the culprits will be punished. And message number 5 for next date for information, which will be available when we will have further details. Of course, again, don't leave the clients without answers, and customer support is extremely important during the first weeks, especially during the first 4 or 3 days. And again, additional costs are worth it for that, really are worth it for the client support, customer support. Then, of course, normal social media and all other channels, as Arina has said, at least once per day during the first week. But this is a subtle game. You can't say too much, you can't say too little, but again, constant information at least once per day during the first week is imperative. And next slide, please. And with all others, media, authorities, and insurance, again, these are very important stakeholders, but they come only afterwards. Of course, authorities, you need to report. It goes without saying. You need to cooperate. It goes without saying. But you need to have them on your side. You need to say that, look, you should stand by me. You should stand by me. Therefore, prosecutor, police, and DPAs should be on your side, and you can do it by only being very proactive with them, by only being very cooperative with them, and lodging the claim and so on against the culprit. It's I think like that. So that was from my side, and the last but not the least slide is the spoiler alert, the 1st of March event, which is coming in Lithuania. It's the biggest of the kind event, annual event, privacy and data protection event in the Baltics, which is organized already for the 14th year. And we are hosting that event for a number of years now. And this time, the event will be dedicated for the data ethics and sustainability as a top priority in 2022. And this is the QR code on the top left side of the corner. You will be able to detach and scan that. 20 speakers from all over the globe. I think it will be the concentrated 4 hours and the best 4 hours in the data and privacy topic you may have. So please don't waste this opportunity. Thank you. And then I think that the floor is for Aleksei.
All right, thank you. Let me share my materials. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see this. Good stuff. All right, well, thank you for having me. So I'm going to start with a story to set the scene. Imagine that you have just started in a new job. You've had an intense first week learning about the business and meeting your new colleagues. It's now a Friday afternoon, not unlike this one. But you stayed in the office late reading up about something, and now you're the only one in the office. But you're about ready to pack up and head out for a well-deserved beer. But then your computer stops working. It displays a weird picture and a threatening message. You look around in the office and you see that other computers have similarly stopped working. Now, you remember reading about ransomware in the news, and this looks kind of familiar. You also vaguely remember from your new joiner training and reading policies that if your company loses any data, there are some important and urgent regulatory matters to consider. So in terms of immediate response, where do you begin? So I'm going to help untangle this question in a somewhat roundabout way, further to what's already been said by Arina, Mari-Liis, and Mindaugas. And we'll start by looking at the context. First, I will say a couple of words about who may likely get involved in a cyber incident, just to reinforce that what's already been said, and the developing trends in this space. And I think the key point you need to know, and something that you've already heard today, is that cyber incident response is becoming increasingly multidisciplinary, with more stakeholders to consider than just tech and IT. Secondly, I will highlight a few trends from the technology standpoint that are likely to influence the thinking and expectations around the incident, and the key word here will be speed. And finally, we will walk through the standard incident lifecycle to put these things together and see how it may all fit together in practice. Okay, now before we go there, a few words on my own experience. So personally, I've been working in technical cybersecurity for over a dozen years. which is a scary thought. I'm from Estonia, but currently based in the UK. In my last role, I headed up a large part of cyber security operations for Aviva, a multinational insurance and asset management firm. That entailed looking after a staff of 40 and being accountable for anything to do with cyber intelligence, detection and response, and all of our attack simulation activities. And from March, in a couple of weeks, I'm moving to the PwC cyber practice here to help other firms deal with incidents and prepare for them. And that actually brings us nicely to the first question about the incident response ecosystem. If your firm has a serious cyber incident, where do you turn for help? So on the screen here, you'll see a few folks who may get involved. It's of course usual for the firm to try and handle the incident with its internal IT and security teams at first. Coming back to the Friday night scenario, as a regular member of staff, this is who you should definitely call in the first instance, that is your IT or security colleagues. And look, the internal team may generally be as far as it goes for minor or routine issues where no data loss is involved. However, if it transpires that additional skills or expertise are required, or if it's warranted by the scale or the publicity of the incident, the firm may well decide to call in for external reinforcements. Who exactly gets called will very much depend on the business and also its location. The market for these services and also the norms do differ country by country. But the one clear trend I wanted to highlight here really is that for a significant cyber incident, more of these stakeholders will be involved than ever before. You won't be able to avoid talking to them. And what is also changing is that whereas, let's say 10 years ago, the firm that provided technical cyber response and forensic services would likely have been called first and directly to support with the technical aspects, nowadays it is increasingly likely that an insurer or a law firm is called to help manage the incident and then in turn instructs or refers a technical cyber response provider. For example, when we look at the US, CrowdStrike, a major cyber response firm, has recently stated that by now they conduct about half of their work under the instruction of external legal counsel. When I speak to my peers in the UK, the picture here definitely seems to be moving in the same direction. So in terms of cyber insurance, by the way, so cyber insurance products of some niche form have been on the market since the 90s. But the market has developed and grown over time, adapting to threats, cyber threats and exposures, and is now firmly in the mainstream with the size of the global market in the billions. So I'm not sure how much exposure the group here has to dedicated cyber insurance, but it is a product that's also available in the Baltics, and in fact, last year, cyber insurance was one of the key focus topics for the Baltic Insurance and Reinsurance Conference organized by the Latvian Insurers Organization. So now that we've looked at who may get involved, let me try and paint a picture of the technology considerations an average business may have when dealing with an incident. From a technology environment standpoint, most businesses with a longer track record will have to contend with some level of complexity. A typical environment will likely include elements of in-house managed IT, some IT services purchased from others under a contract, and services available via web portals on a software as a service basis. Increasingly, an environment will include cloud hosting and services, for larger firms potentially extending across multiple cloud providers. Depending on the business, the environment may also include some instances of embedded or operational technology, anything from IP cameras in the lobby to factory equipment, now all happily hooked up to the computer network. And let me also briefly turn to the security technologies that we may find in place protecting this IT environment. The risks of getting hacked and losing data, have been with us for a long time, and so have security standards and recommended controls like basic antivirus and some level of access management. However, I think it's worth mentioning a few specific, more recent trends that are helping drive the change in thinking around what's considered an appropriate way to manage cybersecurity today. And one which already got a great mention is undoubtedly ransomware. For example, some of you may remember last year's attack that temporarily shut down the operations of Colonial Pipeline, impacting US fuel flow and global fuel prices. Some of you may instead be familiar with a fascinating case, I think, of a ransomware attack against the Belarus Railway a few weeks ago that impacted transport and military movements. And some of you may also know that not all ransomware incidents are this big in public. In the Baltics, we're probably talking about at least a dozen small incidents, a few dozen of small incidents of such nature a month, with only a few ever reaching the media. And look, honestly, it's a completely different proposition dealing with a cyber incident that stops business operations compared to dealing with a data loss or an intrusion investigation whilst the business keeps on running. The second evolutionary point I thought would be worth mentioning is the modern approach to managing IT and IT change. A popular view, spearheaded not least by major US technology firms, is that empowering technology teams and IT users to work as autonomously as possible is an important factor in unlocking productivity. And this means rethinking the usual approval and segregation of duty arrangements and coming up with new means for managing threats associated with compromised user identities. And now, if you think about a security team that has to defend the organization from traditional threats and also account for things like ransomware and agile working practices, having them rely on manual investigations and response is just going to be too slow and too costly. This is recognized by the security technology market with growth in offerings pertaining to behavior analytics, security orchestration, automation, response solutions, and extended detection response offerings. It is also factored in natively in the security capabilities of major cloud providers. To conclude this section, hopefully this helps paint the picture of the technology environment in which we will have to tackle our cyber incident. There will be a level of complexity and also a need to automate. Right, and that's it for context. Now let's try to put this together in practice and answer the Friday night scenario question from an organizational perspective. All right, what an organization should be prepared to do to manage an incident well. And a common way to think about it and analyze the capability is to divide the incident management end-to-end flow into phases. The phases that I've outlined here are largely aligned to described in ESA standards, US NIST standards, SANS materials, and other pertinent authoritative guidance. You should see many parallels here to what has already been outlined by Arina and Mindaugas earlier. But just for clarity, to explain these phases in brief. So preparation refers to the steps that a firm should take in the course of its regular operation to be best set up to deal with incidents. Detection analysis refers to the steps of detecting events that may indicate an incident and making sense of the data. Containment refers to the actions taken early on to ensure the incident doesn't get any worse. Eradication and recovery refer to the actions of cleaning up the IT environment and restoring business services. And post-incident actions cover any tasks that an organization would think appropriate to undertake after the incident is concluded. So let me highlight how some of the trends I spoke about earlier influence these phases, starting from the top. And again, something that you've already heard, preparation is really the foundation for a good incident response. As part of preparation, an organization must set out the basics of what kind of things it will actually consider an incident, who will be on point for leading the response, what steps must absolutely be followed, and what key tools and data will be used. It's also the time to practice, for example, by workshops, playing through incident scenarios, or by conducting red team attack simulations. And coming back to what I said in the beginning of my presentation, this is also the moment to consider the thresholds for involving other stakeholders and external partners like insurers, legal firms, PR firms, and thoroughly thinking through how they will interact with your own team. The last thing you want to do, during a time-critical incident is to get stuck arguing about definitions, about who's in charge, or whether someone is taking on unexpected personal liability. Moving on to detection analysis. Referring back to my earlier statements, the key word here is speed. You heard earlier about some incidents that took quite a while to discover. which unfortunately isn't unusual. But what does your organization consider tolerable in regard to the time it would take to detect and make sense of an incident? In my experience in regulated environments, not being able to provide at least initial detection and response on average within at least a couple of hours at any time on a 24/7 basis is unlikely to be acceptable. You know, hackers can move pretty fast, and if you can't spot them early, it may already be too late. And remember, by the way, it's always going to be a Friday afternoon when this happens. And the actions in the containment, eradication, recovery phases, if we move on, will very much depend on the success and speed of the analysis undertaken after that initial response and during the following investigation. And again, speed and therefore automation is key. The more accurately and more quickly the cyber response team can understand the activities and the route taken by the attacker, distinguish between compromised and clean IT assets, and identities, and match observable behavior to external intelligence pertaining to research and incidents seen at other firms, the more quickly and confidently action can be taken and the incident can be contained, resolved, and recovered from. Ideally, some of the analysis and response actions today would even be taken immediately and automatically without any human interaction. And the capabilities and integrations provided by modern security tool sets, including native services offered by cloud providers, do facilitate all this, but generally need sufficient preparation and practice to provide the best value in an incident. I'll also say that containment, specifically, is likely to be the most stressful part of an incident for everyone involved. This is the moment when the organization knows that it's in trouble and that it needs to react quickly, but where it may not yet necessarily have a full picture of what happened and how it's going to stop it from getting worse. So any gaps in automation, preparation, and practice will really show here. And from the perspective of someone who has run a global incident management function, my personal favorite is always discovering that a team that you absolutely need to do something is not reachable outside their core working hours in their time zone. And having to improvise on the spot, which, as Mindaugas said, can be quite challenging. So, and if we look at it from maybe another lens, right? Like what would be the worst case? The worst position I think an organization can be in is if it can't identify at all how the attacker got in, what they did in the IT environment, what they took out, and whether they're still there. In that case, eradication and recovery would essentially mean rebuilding the whole IT setup from scratch, likely permanently losing data and knowledge, and a massive time and cost drag on the business. And these days, I think it will be quite difficult to explain to external stakeholders as well. So to conclude, I'll just leave you with these three messages. So firstly, I think by now you should be convinced that cyber incident response is more multidisciplinary than ever, with many folks involved outside of tech and cyber. Secondly, developments in technology and also the threat do require increased velocity and automation for cyber incidents to be stopped quickly enough. And thirdly, a modern cyber incident management approach must really prepare and adapt to these realities throughout the incident life cycle. And of course, I'll also leave you with a question. Do you think your organization is prepared? And on that, I will conclude. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Aleksei. Really, it's a good question, by the way. And I want to ask you this question. My organization, my client's organization, and all other organizations I meet on a daily basis. It's really very difficult to answer. But basically, I think we may go further to the next speaker, Arijus, and he will present the media crisis management fundamentals, so to say. So Arijus, without any further ado, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Hi all, it was nice to hear the good presentations, and all the presenters were talking about PR communication and media response. We are talking about data leak, cybersecurity threats, and other things. But first of all, crisis. When we are talking about crisis, there are no communication crisis. Usually, it's your business crisis, your organization crisis, which will impact and outside the company and inside the company. And the first question will be, what the hell happened? And from the very beginning, when all around will start to talk that what's happened, that you lost data, that somebody stole your data, and all the social media and media will go crazy, will you still stuck to this question, what happened? And yep, sorry, I will check. Yep, now I think you see the presentation. Till 2017, I was working already on crisis management for more than 10 years, and I was thinking that I know everything about crisis and what to do. And in that year, I had to deal with the crisis, which I think you know quite well. One cosmetic surgery clinic lost 24,000 patient data, including photos and all the other things what can have doctor about you. And in 2 days, we got covered not just local media, we got covered all the world. And of course, we were later laughing that it was the best way to raise the awareness of your company in all the world. But the stress what we got at that time was totally crazy. And first thing when we're talking about crisis management, about communication in crisis, and usually in data leak, I don't use the word crisis. Usually it's attack. It's a war. Hackers or other people who stole your data, who is using it to get money, they know that publicity or the fact that you lost data, publicity and will raise questions. People will start to call you, talk about you, and they are really interested to raise this heat as much as possible, because they are looking for money, and the publicity is the only way to do. And usually you think that you are prepared for this kind of events and for this kind of things, but first of all, it doesn't matter. It can be the same data leak, like in your friend's company or what you read on newspapers, but it's unique for you. Usually crisis is the thing what happened and you don't know how to deal with it. Maybe you have all the bullet points to whom to call and to whom to talk, but when you will connect to Zoom to find the way of how to deal with it, the situation will be unique totally, and it will be really, really close to you. Second thing, which is, yes? Okay, maybe. What about now? Okay. And of course, Aleksei told that it will happen on Friday afternoon when everybody is leaving the office. You can start in the middle of the night and you will receive a letter from some hacker, or maybe your friend will call and will say that they find out your data on one of the web page, and it will be totally unexpected to you. Even if you are prepared, this time will be crazy, and all the business will stop for you, because you don't know where is your data, you don't know what kind of data, You don't know really is it your data, maybe it's somebody else, and maybe it's an attack, false attack, and you will overreact. And of course, all the time, it's 24 hours, 1 week, 1 month, even a few months, you still unclear what kind of data. Is it full package? Maybe you lost data in some other place, and you still don't know what happened. Of course, when happens a crisis to your company and to you as a person, it's very easy to accelerate this crisis by your steps or by somebody else's steps. First of all, it's a lie. Usually, from my experience, for example, media is calling to the company and asking, we heard that you lost your data. Is it right? And some people are saying, no, we lost nothing. It's not about us. Because the company received a letter from a hacker with asking some money, but maybe it was a secretary who just delete the email, and you really don't know. And you can lie just because you don't know, and you know that if you will say, I will need to check, it will be message also for media. So to lie, it's very easy in this kind of crisis. Second thing, what will happen in your company, you will start to blame each other, who is responsible. And of course, it's IT, first of all. Second one, CEO will start to call to everybody in the company, looking for whom to blame. And at the same time, in all the media, social media will start, like we call it, it's experts ritual dance. Everybody will start to say, will start to talk. What happened to you? What kind of data? Is it really interesting data, or is it nothing at all? And media will start to publish them every 15 minutes, 1 hour, few days. Everybody will know what happened to you, but you still unclear what happened to you. So these things will impact you in 1 or 2 days with a full scope, different things, calls from stakeholders, calls from media, inside the talks. Somebody will start to say that it's not my fault, it's your fault, and so on and so on. Company structure will go down, company communication structure. And there is a really important part, because you can't prepare step by step, word by word, what you're gonna do. Because some kind of improvisation you will need to have in place. Because, of course, I fully agree with Aleksei, Mindaugas, and other people who were talking there. To have bullet points what to do, it's necessary. To have a plan, it's necessary. But you have to be prepared to improvise, because you don't know, it will be Friday afternoon or Saturday night. Maybe it will be a holiday in your company, in your country, and you will need to make police and prosecutors work on a holiday. It will be quite hard, but you need to be prepared for some kind of improvisation. First of all, you need to isolate the crisis. You can't make the data leak crisis of all your company, because a company needs to run. To fix the crisis, to work with the crisis, you need resources. These resources you can get just from your company. Your company needs to run your business in any case after the incident and after 1 day, 6 days, 1 year, doesn't matter. You need to run your business. And this is the most important thing when we're talking about cybersecurity crisis. Because it's really easy to stop all your business. We close all the systems, nobody can connect to them. And if your business is related to data, what you have, it's your client's data and so on and so on, it will stop cash flow to your company. It will be crazy because your CFO will start to call and saying, guys, what you're doing, something is wrong here in our account. So, and there is a very important part. When we are talking about crisis management team, you have to understand that it's not a legal crisis. It's not communication crisis. All the people in the company who are related to this crisis need to work in the team. We used to say that dead body in Armani is still dead body. So communication can make maybe your company look better in that kind of situation, but lawyers can make your company up and running. So it's better to look not so nice at that time, but to keep your company running. And of course, internal communication. Internal communication is the first thing that you have to do. Because these people who are working in your company will start to talk much more earlier than social media and media will talk. And these guys are responsible for your daily operations. These guys are responsible for help to fixing the problems. And these guys are the only thing you can relate on, because nobody will stand together with you on the first days of your crisis. It will be big business, which lost my data, my as a person data, and they lost it because they saved money in places where they have to spend. They were thinking about profits, not about my security, and so on and so forth. So this thing will be really impacting your company, and the only thing can help you, it's your internal people. And of course, the main three followers of the crisis, what you will have right after you find out what happened to you. First of all, stress. You can prepare the crisis management plans for any cases, but crisis is unique because it was unplanned, and stress will be on stakeholder side, on shareholders, on CEOs' faces, and so this will go through all the company, through all the organization by waves. Stress will be the first follower. Second one, anyway, first thing what we do, we ask a question, what happened? Next question is, who is responsible? And we are doing it inside the company also, not just outside the company. And to write the comment under the article in the news portal, it's really easy, because you can be sure that all the people inside your company is on your side, really. Maybe somebody knows something and will write down some information on the side. Maybe you will start to look for a scapegoat in management who was doing something wrong. So, and it will be second follower. And of course, when we are talking about data leak events, when we are talking about the hackers, we are talking about data really without data. We have no data. We don't know what happened. And we need to be prepared to act knowing nothing. And preparation. What can you do not to? I don't think that it's possible in all the ways to secure your company from this kind of crisis. It can happen, and you don't know when. But reputation of your company, long-term reputation of your company, can give you 1 hour or 2 hours to prepare, respond to the public questions, prosecutors' questions, authorities' questions, and so on. If your company's reputation is good, you have a little bit more time to respond and to be a little bit less late, but you will be late anyway. Teamwork. And when we are talking about teams which are working on crisis management, we should we have to be sure that legal team can talk to communication team and can talk to IT team on the same language. It's really important because sometimes you lose your time just trying to find out the right words to talk to each other. And everybody needs to know who is responsible for what. And character. Character is the most important thing. How you gonna respond to this kind of crisis, same like to all the other crises what happened, which is, it's about your company culture, your organization culture. Who will talk? CEO will talk, PR people will talk, lawyers will talk. Different companies can choose different ways to deal with the crisis, but you have to think about before the crisis hits you. And later, after a few months of the crisis, anyway, you will have to think about how to get your reputation back. But when we are talking about issues with a data leak, we should be prepared to understand. Nobody will forget what happened. Everybody will understand. So the only way, from my perspective, is not to hide what happened to you, to use as your unique scratch. We are unique because of what happened, and now we are a few steps forward. We know what happened. We know that we are responsible and for what, and we know what to do in the future, never to be on the same spot again. So it's my presentation is really short. I hope that we will have more questions and maybe even from presenter side. Thanks.
Thanks, Arijus. Really insightful, and I think without any further time waste, I will jump in to the Q&A session, so to say. And well, I can open the questions, but basically, both Mari-Liis, Aleksei, and Arina, you're also welcome to pose the questions to the speakers or to each other. We have still 15 minutes left, so if I may, I could start from the general question, which is as follows. In my practice, I always hear the thing from, not always, but very, very frequently hear the thing from the clients that, look, it's impossible to prepare for these kind of events. And even the best plan you have, it won't work that way when you are in crisis that way. Maybe not spend too much time on that. And I try to figure out what's in their head, and I kind of understand that the mentality is that, look, we hope we will be immune from that, and I don't think this is a good strategy. In my view, it's a poor strategy to rely on hope that it will be somehow you will be immunized, because immunity, you need to earn the immunity, right? So my question is as follows. Maybe you have some practical insights on how to train the people, how to train. Maybe there are some programs or software or tricks how to make this plan at least simulated, because we have saying in Lithuanian, and I think that it's the same in Russian, the more difficult in practice, the more easy in war. So, I mean, maybe you have some shortcuts or some ideas what you propose to the clients. Aleksei, Arijus?
Okay, maybe I will start. First of all, it's really nice that this year we started to receive more and more questions and from the client side to run war rooms simulations for different kind of crisis what can happen in a company. Everybody understands that to have a plan is really okay, and you need a plan, but you need to simulate the problem, what happened, and to see how team is working together, and how to. It can be an easy question. It can be a really huge question when we are talking about data leak or something like this. But simulation, because crisis is the worst time to know each other. You have to know your team. You have to know you have to know names, surnames. Do they like whiskey or beer or something like this? You need to know them, because you need team to work together and not to saying, hi, my name is Arijus. So this is the key point. And of course, media trainings to see how people are talking to each other, how they are talking to the camera, and so on and so forth. It's a basics what you can do, but usually if you have this kind of war rooms 4-3 times per year, you can be sure that this team can call to each other and start to fix the problem and to make plan happen. But without it, it's a way, to lose time, of course, to lose money and to get a problem in public side.
Yeah, I totally agree. When the company is going through a crisis, no one is going to pick up, the big crisis manual from the shelf and start following it. You really need people to know what's in there, and the best way for them to internalize it is by practicing. So war rooms are great, having a couple of workshops where different teams work through what they would do in a particular scenario and really kind of getting to know each other and how they would respond. I think that works really effectively.
And I guess maybe you heard some specific software. At least I know that there are some ways of checking the resistance and resilience of the employee or staff against different phishing attacks and wherever, by pinging the employees on random basis, of course with acknowledgement of the management, but without knowledge of the employees. Do you have some practice of whether these kind of software-based tools work? Are they effective, or what's your view, Aleksei?
Well, if we're talking specifically about services and tools that can help kind of train staff in practice, they do work to an extent for sure, and they also provide some visibility, I think, into the limitations of training sometimes, because it's if you conduct phishing exercises on staff, you'd usually have a target that you want to reach, but it's never going to be zero. Someone will always fall for it. So and the other thing is, of course, these are just, these give you a data point, and these give staff some experience with it, but they're not going to help you in a crisis.
Okay. Then I always have a question from my clients who are in trouble already, that we have been locked. I mean, data has been locked. So the first question, do we need to negotiate with the ransomware attacker? What's your gut feeling answer?
Arijus, what's your view?
You can, I think that we were talking about it and a lot with our team and when we were working on the crisis. But usually it's if you pay once, you will pay twice. So sometimes it's, I think that it's better to be transparent, better to understand what's going on. And because you're dealing with the criminals, and if you're dealing with the criminals, you're criminals. So
yeah, I would hasten to say that I think authorities in the Baltics do not recommend making payments to criminals. But of course, the reality is that sometimes, there is no other way, and the negotiation does need to happen, at least to buy the company some time to be able to respond to a crisis. Yeah, and that's I think all I'll say on that.
Okay, yeah, indeed, a difficult question to answer, and well, formal answer is no, you can't. I mean, you are definitely not recommended, and you can't. But yeah, unfortunately, the answer in reality depends.
I think just to add to that, if I may, yeah, if you decide to negotiate for some reason, it's better not to do it on your own. There are, again, companies that specialize in this. Maybe involving the authorities would be appropriate directly, or at least having a legal representative, because yeah, it's quite a touchy subject that you can get into quite a lot of legal trouble, including personal liability.
Then the question, maybe it's also related to this ransomware attacking. At least we as lawyers always raise, and well, recently are getting from the clients are around the bounty programs, and again, the white or gray hat hacking, or even sometimes black hat hacking programs. And legality of these programs and legality of these hacking actions is one thing, and let's leave it aside. I mean, because again, it depends on the local country regulation. We do have some rules on responsible disclosure, so to say, but nevertheless, Aleksei, what's your view on that? I mean, what are the key messages or key recommendations you would have to the clients who wanna install this program, bounty program? What are the precautions or maybe recommendations from your practice you may say to the clients?
Well, from my past experience considering these programs in companies, they're sometimes difficult to position in terms of the benefit in a way, because yes, you are getting a level of coverage. You know that someone will be looking at your IT and trying to find issues with it, and you can draw some comfort from the fact that they'll likely find something and help you secure yourself. But they're not, bug bounty programs aren't necessarily a structured way to look at your security. Right, so you don't really know what you'll get out necessarily. So that would be my one point to make. I mean, but they definitely can be a good addition, in terms of a control framework.
Okay, I think, Arina, maybe you can spell out the question you have to Aleksei, I believe, right?
Yes, so during our Latvian webinar, we touched upon possible decryption of files of data which was encrypted during a ransomware attack. So the representative of our cybersecurity institution, CERT, said that on some occasions it was possible to actually decrypt the data due to some mistakes that attackers themselves allowed. And also CERT said that attackers are not, ideal people. They also make mistakes. And in some cases, it has been possible to use those mistakes and to decrypt the data. Do you have any comment on that, Aleksei?
Well, yeah, it's definitely worth trying. There is a fantastic web resource called No More Ransom. So this is an initiative that was set up, I think, by Dutch law enforcement in collaboration with Europol. And essentially, it's a public repository of decryption tools for different ransomware types. So if, first, when you have a ransomware on your systems, if you can identify it, you can check online whether there's a decryptor available for it. But, I'd say that, the more advanced criminals don't make as many mistakes. So this is likely to work for more, basic ransomware these days.
Okay, and maybe we're running out of time, so I think I have at least the last question to both of you. So maybe I would start from Arijus. What is the biggest mistake so far? Just one mistake, which was made by the clients of yours during the event. I mean, which was like the first which comes to your mind.
Of course, the biggest problem, I think, and not the biggest problem, but the biggest mistake, it's to say, okay, let's keep it quiet. Nobody will hear about it. Nobody will write down about it. Nobody will talk about it. Nothing happened. Still media not calling, so we can be just relaxing and doing like we used to do every day. It's the biggest mistake. If somebody lost your data, somebody of this data will pop up one day or another.
Well, I just say that the biggest mistake you can make is not preparing enough, because the less prepared you are, the more mistakes you'll make during an incident.
Okay, thanks, guys. Thank you for presentations. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your time and your insights. And also, thank you for Sandra, who was helping us. Thank you, Zoom TV, and thank you all the audience who were with us during these 90 minutes, which hopefully are or were interesting and helpful, useful to you. Now it's really Friday again, and I think that we have deserved something for Friday evening. All the best, and keep your data safe. Bye.
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 Bye-bye.